Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity slows to a comfortable pace, and the big questions settle in beside you like an old friend who doesn't mind speaking softly. Tonight we're taking a quiet stroll into a moment long before cities rose, before stories were written down, before anyone had a name to call themselves by. We're going back to the time when humans first became aware of being human, not just alive and reacting to the world, but actually noticing their own thoughts, feelings, and existence. It's a strange thing to imagine because awareness feels so ordinary now. We wake up in the morning and know who we are without thinking about it. But there was once a period in our history where something shifted and that sense of self appeared. Not all at once, not as a sudden epiphany, but gradually, quietly, shaped by the world around early humans and the minds developing inside them. Before we wander too far into that distant landscape, I'm curious about something a bit more grounded in your present moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe it's late and the lights are dim. Maybe you're settling in after a long day or easing into a slower rhythm. Whatever the moment looks like for you, I'm glad you're here. And if this gentle exploration helps you unwind or makes you feel a little more connected to the wider story of our species, it would mean a great deal if you'd give the video a like or subscribe. It helps this quiet corner reach others who enjoy a calm space to think about the world. For now, take a slow breath and let your thoughts soften. We're not in a rush. The past we're heading towards stretches over thousands of generations. A few more seconds won't make a difference. When you're ready, imagine the Earth as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago. Not the version with paved roads and streetlights, but a world where darkness was complete when the sun went down, except for the faint glow of a fire if a small group of humans had learned to tend one. Nights were filled with sounds we barely notice today. Insects chattering, distant movements from animals moving through grass, the wind pulling at leaves and branches that had never been cut or shaped by human hands. It wasn't a silent world, but it was a world without the constant hum of human activity that surrounds us now. And in that darkness, our ancestors lived with senses tuned to survival. They watched, listened, and responded to everything around them. But at some point in that long history, something more began to stir inside them. To understand what Earth was like when humans became self-aware, it helps to picture not just the environment but the way people lived in it. Our ancestors weren't staying in one place very long. They moved in small groups and travelled through wide landscapes that change with the seasons. Open grasslands stretched farther than the eye could see. Forest edges cut across them, offering shade, food and shelter. Rivers wound their way through valleys, carrying fresh water and the opportunity to find fish or build temporary camps. The Earth was raw, unpredictable, and constantly demanding attention. Yet it was also deeply familiar to early humans in ways most of us can barely imagine now. Every track belonged to a known animal. Every sound signalled something that mattered. Every shift in wind or cloud hinted at weather that could help or harm. People who lived close to the land weren't just aware of it. They were shaped by it. The growing awareness inside early humans wasn't about suddenly becoming philosophers or storytellers. It didn't begin with big questions about life or the universe. It began with simple moments, repeated so often that something new started forming beneath them. Picture someone crouching near a water source, not just quenching their thirst, but noticing their reflection wavering on the surface. For many animals, that reflection means little. It's a flicker of movement, something momentarily interesting. But there's evidence that even animals like elephants, dolphins, and some birds show faint glimmers of recognizing themselves. Early humans likely noticed these flickers too. But as their brains grew more complex, those reflections may have sparked more than simple curiosity. They might have triggered the smallest beginnings of "that's me," even if the thought itself wasn't yet formed in words. It's worth remembering that early humans didn't have language the way we do. They had sounds, gestures, and shared meaning, but not the structured speech that could break ideas into clear pieces. Without words, awareness didn't arrive as a sentence. It arrived as a feeling, a sense of being the same person from one moment to the next, a sense of being connected to memories that stretched back through days or seasons, a sense of anticipating what might happen later. These experiences might seem basic, but they laid the foundation for everything that came after. Memory, planning, cooperation, and eventually the kind of self-awareness we rely on every day. To appreciate how slow and subtle this process was, imagine a child just starting to understand the world. A child learns who they are not through definitions, but through experiences. They learn the difference between their body and what surrounds it. They learn that reaching for something changes the world around them. They learn that their actions cause reactions. Early human awareness likely grew in a similar way, not with words or explanations, but with repeated moments of noticing and understanding. Over many generations, these small steps built into something larger. While minds were changing, the Earth itself was no quiet backdrop. This was a time when the planet was shifting through ice ages and warm periods. Environments transformed as glaciers advanced and retreated. Grasslands expanded, forests moved, rivers carved new paths, and animals migrated across changing landscapes. Early humans lived through these shifts, adapting their movements, their tools, and their behaviour as the world reshaped itself again and again. These changes didn't just force physical adaptation, they encouraged mental flexibility. A stable environment lets species specialise. A changing environment rewards curiosity, experimentation, and awareness. Early humans needed to remember where food sources were, how to find water in dry seasons, which paths were safe, and how to recognise subtle signs that something dangerous might be nearby. This memory wasn't just instinct, it required active thought. The mind had to store details and recall them at the right moment. And with that growing memory came something new, a sense of personal continuity, a recognition that the same individual who felt hunger yesterday was the same one feeling it today, and would be the same one preparing for tomorrow's challenges. This kind of continuity is central to self-awareness. It's not philosophical, it's practical. But it laid the groundwork for the deeper sense of identity that developed later. Imagine someone in that distant world sitting beside a fire. Fire wasn't just warmth or protection. It was a rare opportunity to pause without total darkness. In that time of rest, thoughts could wander. People might have watched the flames and felt something gentle and unfamiliar, a moment where survival didn't demand every bit of attention, a moment where the mind could drift. It's easy to picture someone remembering earlier experiences, noticing patterns, or thinking ahead to what might come. These simple reflections were building blocks for a deeper sense of self, not because they were profound, but because they allowed early humans to compare moments across time. The earth around them played a role in shaping this awareness too. Open landscapes encouraged long-distance vision, which in turn supported planning. Forest edges required caution and quick decisions. Weather changes prompted movement and cooperation. Every part of the environment nudged early humans to think not just about what was happening in the moment, but what might happen next. And when a species begins to think ahead, it begins to form an internal world, a space where ideas live. That inner space is the foundation of self-awareness. Living in small social groups also influenced the rise of self-awareness. Early humans needed to understand not just their own actions, but the actions and reactions of others. Cooperation was essential for survival, whether hunting, gathering, caring for young, or protecting the group. To cooperate well, you need to recognize other individuals as consistent beings with their own intentions. You need to predict how they might behave and how your behavior will affect them. This requires a kind of mental modeling that inevitably turns inward as well. If you understand others as thinking beings, it becomes easier to recognize thinking in yourself. The social world encouraged a new layer of awareness, one where individuals became aware not only of their experiences, but of their identity within a group. With the earth changing around them and their social lives becoming more complex, early humans gradually developed a richer inner world. They began to remember not just events, but the roles they played in those events. They began to organize thoughts, feelings, and plans. They began to understand themselves as separate from the environment and from others, even while being connected to both. This awareness wasn't loud or dramatic. It grew quietly across thousands of generations, supported by the challenges and opportunities of the world they lived in. As we move deeper into this story, we'll explore how this growing awareness shaped their daily lives, how the landscapes they travelled influenced their minds, how firelight changed the way they thought, and how small steps eventually led to art, language, and the full sense of self we now take for granted. The journey ahead isn't rushed. It's a slow walk through a world where minds were just beginning to open, where Earth itself shaped the earliest thoughts of our species, and where the first gentle signs of I am began to appear. Long before anyone could look at the world and think of themselves as part of it, the Earth was moving through ages shaped by climate, shifting landscapes, and species that came and went without leaving names behind. It was a world that existed in its own rhythm, a world where every sound, every change of light, every passing season carried meaning for the creatures living through it, but none of those creatures stopped to wonder about what any of it meant. This wasn't a quiet emptiness or a lack of life. Far from it. The planet was full of activity, movement, and complexity, but there was no single mind capable of standing apart and recognizing that the world around them was a stage they were part of. It was a world alive in every direction, but without anyone who could say, I am here. If you were to stand in that distant age and look around, you wouldn't see anything familiar at first glance. Not because the land itself was unrecognizable, but because the human shape, the human voice, and the human way of moving weren't part of the landscape yet. This was a time when earlier species walked upright, used simple tools, and moved in groups, but they didn't see themselves the way we see ourselves now. They didn't have an inner narrative or a sense of identity that reached across time. They reacted to hunger, danger, comfort, and opportunity. They had families and social bonds. They recognized one another by sight, sound, and scent, but they lived entirely within the present moment, guided by instincts that had been shaped through countless generations. The Earth itself was in a constant process of change. Large regions were rolling grasslands that stretched far beyond anything most of us will ever see. These open spaces weren't empty. They were filled with animals that migrated in enormous herds, following the cycle of growth and decay that moved across the seasons. Predators adapted to those migrations, moved with them, taking advantage of opportunities that shifted from month to month. Scavengers trailed behind, finding what they could in the remains. The air was thick with the kinds of sounds you only find in places where human activity has never interfered. Birds calling to one another from high vantage points, insects creating a steady background chorus, the low rumble of distant movement carried by the wind. All of this happened without any creature wondering about the meaning of the soundscape or the patterns inside it. Forests were different then too. They weren't shaped by agriculture or managed by human hands. Trees grew, fell, burned, and sprouted again without a single thought about efficiency or design. Everything was arranged by the slow push and pull of climate, soil, and the creatures that passed through. In some places, trees grew close enough to block most of the sunlight, creating pockets of cool, damp space filled with moss, fungi, and the constant search for food from animals adapted to the shadows. In other places, forests spread out more loosely, allowing sunlight to filter through in a shifting mosaic that changed as leaves turned with the breeze. Early humans and their relatives would have moved through these environments with a level of awareness tuned entirely towards survival, noticing the smallest signs of food, danger, or shelter. But they didn't yet carry the sense of self that would later allow their descendants to ask who they were, where they came from, or why the world looked the way it did. Rivers carved pathways through the land. Some were wide, deep, and slow-moving. Others were narrow and rapid, cutting through rock as they moved toward larger bodies of water. Animals relied on these rivers just as early humans eventually would. They came to drink, to cool off, to cross from one grazing area to another. Some species followed the river's paths for long distances, using them as guides that shaped their yearly movements, but none of them understood the river as a concept or a part of a world larger than their immediate surroundings. They knew the water was there, that it solved a need, that it sometimes brought danger. That was enough. If you could observe long enough, you'd see that the Earth in that time wasn't still or unchanging. Ice sheets expanded and contracted across continents. Rainfall patterns shifted, creating new lakes, drying old ones, and pushing forests and grasslands into new arrangements. Volcanoes erupted in ways that could reshape whole landscapes. Some eruptions covered enormous regions with layers of ash, changing ecosystems for decades. Others released gases that influenced the planet's temperature. None of these changes felt like events to the creatures living through them. They were simply conditions to adapt to or perish from. During this time, several species of early humans existed. Some had larger brains than others. Some crafted tools from stone that had edges sharper than anything the world had seen before. Others used tools in simpler ways, picking up objects from the ground only to drop them again after they had served a specific purpose. These species belonged to the long lineage that would eventually lead to us, but they themselves didn't yet carry the self-reflective spark we now consider central to being human. Their brains were developing. Their social groups were growing more organized. Their ability to cooperate was becoming more advanced. But their awareness was focused outward, on immediate needs and immediate challenges, not on the inner sense that would one day emerge. A world without that sense was still full of emotion, though not the kind expressed through introspection. Early human relatives felt fear, hunger, affection, territoriality, and curiosity. Some evidence suggests they formed tight bonds within their groups. They cared for injured members long enough for them to show signs of healing. They travelled long distances together, moving as coordinated units even without language. These kinds of behaviours required a certain kind of awareness, but not the deep inner world that would eventually allow humans to think about themselves in relation to the Earth. The Earth wasn't waiting for humans to become self-aware. It wasn't preparing itself or guiding the process. It simply existed, full of patterns and pressures that nudged life in different directions. The slow shifts in climate forced species to adapt, move, or disappear. Food sources came and went depending on the year. Predators evolved new strategies. Prey developed new defenses. Everything alive was part of a connected system shaped by time and necessity. The first signs of self-awareness didn't emerge because the world became more dramatic or more demanding. They emerged because early humans were forced to think in more complex ways to survive in a world that never stopped changing. Fire appeared in this time, though not yet fully controlled. Lightning strikes set dry grass ablaze. Volcanoes sent streams of molten rock down their sides. Natural fires cleared old growth and encouraged new sprouts, attracting grazing animals and the predators that followed them. Early humans weren't the only creatures that watched these fires from a distance, but they were among the few interested enough to get closer. They learned that fire scared off predators. They realized that food exposed to the heat changed in ways that made it easier to chew or digest. These observations didn't require deep self-awareness. They required attention and memory. But each repeated moment of learning nudged early minds closer to something more. Tools also shaped this age in ways that went beyond immediate usefulness. The earliest tools were simple, but making them required planning. A toolmaker needed to imagine the shape of the finished object, choose the right type of stone, and strike it with consistent force. This process encouraged a kind of thinking that stretched beyond the present moment. It didn't produce philosophical reflection, but it did prepare the brain for the kind of awareness that would eventually emerge. The Earth didn't change because of these tools, at least not yet, but the minds that held them did. The animals around early humans behaved in ways familiar to anyone who has watched wildlife today. Elephants travelled in family groups, big cats hunted with patience and precision, antelopes gathered in herds, birds migrated across continents. None of them questioned their place in the world or wondered about the meaning of their actions. They reacted, survived, raised young, and carried on the patterns that had defined their species for ages. Their behaviour was complex and in many cases intelligent, but it wasn't reflective. It didn't turn inward. It didn't generate the question at the heart of our species. Who am I? When early humans looked at the landscape, they didn't yet have the inner voice that would eventually appear. They didn't describe their surroundings in thought or memory. They experienced the world directly, without language to separate things into categories. A predator wasn't a concept. It was a shape, a movement, a threat that triggered immediate action. A source of food wasn't an idea. It was a scent carried by the wind, a sight between tall grasses, a sound of footsteps near a water source. Life was immediate, moment to moment, guided by sensation and instinct. But something was changing, even if it wasn't fully visible yet. Brain size was increasing in certain species. Social groups were becoming more complex. Cooperative hunting required planning and coordination. Long-distance travel required anticipation and memory. Care for the young extended for years, demanding patience and shared effort. All of these behaviours shaped the mind. They encouraged early humans to think beyond the present. They created the conditions where a sense of self could slowly form. The Earth played a role in this transformation, not through intention, but through the conditions it created. A world that changes frequently rewards flexible thinking. A landscape that stretches across wide distances encourages exploration. A climate that shifts over millennia pushes species to adapt in creative ways. Early humans lived through these changes and carried the pressure of them in their daily lives. Their minds evolved in response. And as their minds evolved, something quiet and remarkable began to grow inside them. By the time true self-awareness began to emerge, the Earth had already shaped the species that would carry it. It shaped their bodies, their instincts, their social structures, and their need to understand the world in more than one way. The planet didn't know them. It didn't recognize their presence. It simply offered them a place to exist, a place to grow, a place to become something different from anything that had walked before them. By the time early humans began taking their first steps towards something deeper than instinct, the world around them had already shaped their lives in ways that demanded more than simple reactions. They weren't suddenly thinking in the ways we do now. There was no single moment where someone stopped, stared at the sky, and realized they were an individual in a vast universe. Instead, their minds opened the way mornings brighten, slowly, steadily, with changes so subtle no one living through them would have noticed. But from the outside, with the distance time gives us, those small shifts were the earlier sparks of something new. Instinct dominated their lives, but instinct alone wasn't enough anymore. The environments they lived in were unpredictable, full of challenges that didn't follow the same patterns year after year. Food sources moved, weather shifted, predators adjusted their strategies, landscapes changed in ways both gradual and sudden. Species that relied only on fixed instincts struggled when the world didn't match the routines they were built for. Early humans lived in bodies shaped for movement, for endurance, for exploring wide areas. Their success depended on noticing details, remembering experiences and trying new approaches when old ones failed. Instinct could only take them so far. The rest came from minds willing to stretch. One of the simplest but most important steps toward this stretch came from memory. Animals remember things, of course, but early humans began linking memories together in ways that created patterns. A person might recall where a certain fruit had grown during a previous season, or where animals had passed during a time of drought. They didn't reflect on these memories as concepts. They simply brought them forward at the right moments. But each time that happened, The mind was doing something more than reacting. It was connecting past experiences to present decisions. Imagine someone walking through grassland noticing the faint tracks of an animal. Their eyes follow the impressions in the dirt, and they recall a similar trail from the past. They don't think, "Last time these tracks led to food," in the way we'd phrase it. Instead, a sense of familiarity guides them. They choose a direction not because instinct dictates it, but because something inside them knows the past can shape the present. These moments weren't reflections in a modern sense, but they were the earliest threads weaving together a larger internal world. That internal world expanded even further as cooperation deepened. Living in groups required more than simply staying close together. It demanded awareness of others' intentions, moods, and reactions. When early humans hunted together, each member had to anticipate how others would move. If one person started guiding an animal in a certain direction, the others had to adjust without explicit signals. This ability to coordinate wasn't instinctive in the way flocking or schooling is. It required mental flexibility. It required minds that could imagine what others were about to do. At some point, early humans began paying attention to more than physical movements. They noticed expressions, gestures, and patterns of behavior. They recognized that a raised eyebrow, a tense posture, or a certain sound meant something beyond the immediate moment. Again, they didn't think about these ideas in words, but their minds held a growing sense that other individuals had inner states that mattered. This ability to understand the minds of others would eventually become something far more sophisticated, but its beginnings were simple, quiet, and woven into the daily tasks of survival. Another spark came from curiosity, which likely appeared long before true self-awareness, but gained new power during this period. Curiosity pushed early humans to explore their surroundings beyond what was strictly necessary. They turned objects over in their hands. They observed animals not just to hunt them, but because the movement itself captured their attention. They watched fire from a distance and approached it again and again, learning its behavior long before they understood its potential. Curiosity drove them to test new ideas. If one tool broke, they tried a different way of shaping the next one. If one path proved too dangerous, they found another. This experimentation wasn't guided by logic or reflection. It was guided by an expanding mental space where possibilities could be held long enough to test them. Instinct tells a creature what to do. Curiosity asks whether something else might work. That shift didn't require language. It required a mind willing to tread beyond familiar boundaries. As their brains grew larger, another subtle change took place. Early humans began forming mental images that weren't tied directly to the present moment. An individual could lie down to rest and suddenly see, in their mind, the shape of a distant tree or the curve of a river they had walked past earlier that day. These mental images may not have been sharp or detailed, but they were persistent. They weren't memories recalled only when triggered by the environment. They appeared on their own, uninvited, forming the basis of imagination. This imagination wasn't the kind that creates fantasies or stories. It was practical. It allowed an early human to picture the placement of a stone before shaping it. It helped them anticipate the movement of an animal during a hunt. It assisted them in recalling where shelter had been found during a storm. These internal images were early steps toward a richer understanding of the world, not just as it was in front of them, but as it existed across time. Language, or the early forms of it, began changing the way minds worked even before full sentences existed. Groups likely used vocalizations with subtle differences in pitch, rhythm, and volume. These sounds weren't complex, but they carried meaning. A warning call told the group where danger was. A different call signaled the presence of food. Over time, these sounds branched into a larger set of signals. They weren't words yet, but they were pieces of communication that allowed thoughts to be shared. The ability to share thoughts made each individual more aware of the group and in turn more aware of themselves. Alongside communication came gesture. Hands pointed toward distant water, toward a hiding place, toward a source of danger. A simple motion conveyed an idea more efficiently than instinctual cries. These gestures built bridges between minds. They allowed individuals to coordinate, but they also helped them understand that others had intentions and that those intentions could be transmitted. Each shared gesture was a spark illuminating the space between minds. One of the most powerful steps toward deeper thought came from the act of teaching. Teaching requires recognizing that another person does not know what you know. For an early human to guide another in shaping a tool, or in identifying a safe path, they had to understand not only the task, but the learner's lack of knowledge. This wasn't instinctual behavior. It required a mind capable of reflecting on the gap between individuals. Teaching is a sign that a mind is moving beyond its own needs and is taking a broader view of knowledge itself. These sparks didn't happen in isolation. They grew layer by layer across generations. Each generation inherited not just physical traits, but increasingly complex behaviors passed through observation and imitation. Children watched adults shape tools, gather food, and navigate social interactions. They absorbed not just skills, but the thought patterns behind those skills. Their brains developed within a cultural context that became richer with every generation. This accumulation was slow, almost invisible in the short term. But over thousands of years it transformed the human mind into something capable of far more than simple reaction. Another factor that shaped early thought was the need to navigate danger in more nuanced ways. A predator approaching a group required not just immediate flight or fight. It required recognizing patterns. Some predators hunted in the morning, others came at night. Some stalked silently, others announced their presence with calls. Early humans who paid attention to these details had an advantage. They survived more often, and their children inherited their heightened awareness. Over many generations, this created a population with minds capable of holding more information, connecting more patterns, and anticipating outcomes more effectively. Social dynamics also became more intricate. Groups weren't uniform. Some individuals were stronger, others more cautious, others more inventive. These differences created roles. One person might excel at tracking animals, another might be better at crafting tools, another might be skilled at resolving tension within the group. These roles created a structure, and navigating that structure required thought. Understanding where one fit within the group encouraged early forms of self-recognition. It wasn't introspection yet, but it was a foundation. Living closely with others also brought challenges. Disagreements happened, even without complex language. Individuals might compete for resources, mates, or leadership. To navigate these tensions, early humans needed to anticipate reactions, manage emotions, and maintain relationships. These tasks pushed the mind toward greater depth. They required a kind of self-control that instinct alone couldn't provide. Over time, all these pressures, environmental, social, cognitive, built a mind that no longer lived only in the present moment. It lived in the past, the present, and the near future all at once. It held memories, predictions, and impulses in balance. It experimented. It learned from its mistakes. It watched others and formed expectations about them. These were the earlier sparks of a mind stretching beyond instinct. The world around them remained the same in many ways. Seasons changed, animals migrated, weather followed its long cycles. But inside early humans, the landscape was shifting. The internal space that once held simple instincts began to grow wide enough for thought, imagination, and anticipation. Each new generation carried a mind slightly more capable than the last. And although no one at the time could recognize what was happening, those small internal flickers would eventually lead to something extraordinary. The ability to understand oneself. As early human minds began to stretch beyond instinct, the world they lived in shaped every step of that transformation. They didn't become more aware in isolation. Their thoughts, perceptions, and growing sense of self developed in the middle of landscapes that tested them, supported them, and pushed them toward new ways of understanding their surroundings. The wild wasn't just a backdrop. It was an active participant in their development, influencing how they moved, how they survived, and eventually how they thought. Every hill, tree, river, and open plain played a part in shaping the inner lives of early humans long before they knew they had inner lives to speak of. The first landscapes that carried these ancient minds forward were vast and open. Grasslands stretched for miles in every direction, offering both opportunity and danger. In such open spaces, vision became one of the most important tools early humans possessed. Being able to see long distances meant knowing when predators were near or when herds of animals could provide food. This constant need to scan the horizon encouraged brains to process complex visual information. They had to track movement across great distances, notice subtle shifts in the shape of the land, and understand how light changed throughout the day. These tasks might seem simple now, but for early humans they created a rich field of mental activity that pushed awareness further than instinct alone ever could. In open landscapes, early humans didn't just react to what was directly in front of them. They learned to hold multiple pieces of information in mind at once. A group moving across the grasslands had to remember where water had been found the previous season. They had to recognize the tracks of animals and understand which ones signaled danger. They had to follow paths that shifted depending on rainfall, vegetation, and the behavior of migrating herds. This required minds capable of linking memory, observation, and planning. The landscape demanded thought, and in meeting that demand, early humans developed a deeper awareness of their environment and themselves within it. But these open spaces also carried threats that went unnoticed by creatures relying only on instinct. Early humans faced predators who were faster, stronger, and more capable in direct confrontation. Survival required strategy. A sudden movement in tall grass might be a harmless wind, or it might be a large cat preparing to strike. The ability to distinguish between these possibilities wasn't something instinct could fully handle. It required careful attention, patience, and the ability to weigh possibilities. Each of these mental processes nudged early humans toward a more reflective kind of awareness, even if they didn't yet think in words. Beyond the grasslands, forests shaped another part of the early human awareness. These forests weren't the manicured green spaces we imagine when we think of woodland today. They were wild, dense, and constantly shifting. Light filtered through the canopy in patterns that changed with every breeze. Shadows stretched and shrank throughout the day, hiding and revealing shapes in ways that demanded constant attention. In such environments, hearing became just as important as sight. Early humans had to listen for small movements among the leaves, for the calls of birds that might signal a predator nearby, or for the subtle rustle of an animal moving across the forest floor. These forests encouraged a different kind of awareness, one that paid attention to the details close at hand. Navigation wasn't about scanning the horizon but identifying landmarks up close. A particular tree, a cluster of rocks, or a bend in a stream became points of orientation. Remembering these details strengthened memory, and relying on them strengthened confidence in that memory. When early humans moved through dense forest, they weren't just travelling from one place to another. They were mapping their surroundings mentally, building a sense of space that lived inside the mind. This kind of internal map was one of the earlier signs that thought could exist apart from direct experience. Forests also offered resources that encouraged creativity. Stones, branches, and plant fibers could be shaped into tools, containers, and shelters. Experimenting with these materials deepened awareness in ways that went beyond survival. Early humans learned that some rocks split predictably, while others didn't. They noticed that certain plants could be bent, woven, or tied in ways that made them useful. Each discovery reinforced a sense of cause and effect, a sense that the world could be influenced through deliberate action. This growing ability to shape the environment created the early foundations of understanding oneself as a being who could change things. Rivers added another layer to this shaping process. Water was essential for survival, But rivers were more than just drinking sources. They were pathways. They guided migrations, offered fishing opportunities, and influenced where early humans made temporary camps. The behaviour of a river taught early humans to observe patterns in nature. They learned when water levels rose during certain seasons, when fish were more abundant, and when the riverbanks were safest to cross. These observations required minds that could track time in a simple way, linking moments across days and seasons. Understanding time, even in this basic sense, pushed awareness beyond the immediate moment and closer to reflection. The presence of water also attracted other animals, and early humans learned to interpret signs left behind by them. A cluster of footprints might indicate where a herd had recently passed. A disturbed patch of ground might signal the presence of a predator. Understanding these signs required a flexible mind, one capable of reading the landscape almost like a story. Each track, scent, or broken branch carried information that could make the difference between survival and danger. This was one of the earliest forms of symbolic thinking, recognizing that something in the environment represented something not immediately present. Mountains, even when not towering in the dramatic way we picture them today, also influenced early human awareness. Elevation offered safety and perspective. Climbing to a higher vantage point allowed early humans to see broader areas, noticing patterns in weather, animal movements, and changes in vegetation. This sense of height provided a literal and mental shift. From above, the world looked different. Paths became clearer. Distances became easier to gauge. Hazards were easier to anticipate. The ability to step back from immediate surroundings and view things from afar encouraged a kind of thinking that looked at the bigger picture. Over time, this contributed to a mind capable of considering more than immediate needs. In some regions, early humans encountered caves and rock shelters. These spaces offered protection from weather and predators, but they also created opportunities for something new. Caves provided stable environments where groups could rest for longer periods. In these moments of rest, when survival didn't demand immediate decisions, thoughts had room to wander. Some researchers believe that quiet spaces like caves played a role in early imagination. The darkness encouraged minds to fill in gaps. The irregular shapes of rock surfaces invited interpretation. Echoes responded to voices in surprising ways. These experiences didn't produce art or self-reflection all at once, but they pushed the mind toward thinking about things not directly visible. The landscapes early humans lived in weren't uniform. They travelled through environments that changed dramatically from one region to another, moving from grasslands to forests, from dry plains to river valleys, from mountains to open plateaus required different strategies, different memories, and different kinds of awareness. Each transition strengthened mental flexibility. A mind that learned to adapt to one environment was better prepared to adapt to the next. This adaptability was one of the most important steps toward deeper awareness. It encouraged early humans to hold multiple kinds of knowledge at once and to shift between them as needed. Climate shifts played a powerful role too. As ice ages came and went, landscapes transformed. Grasslands expanded during colder, drier periods. Forests advanced during warmer, wetter ones. Rivers changed course as glaciers melted or advanced. Early humans who lived through these shifts didn't understand the long-term patterns behind them, but they adapted to the changes. Their survival required an ability to learn quickly, to remember new information, and to share knowledge within their groups. These collective adjustments strengthened social bonds and encouraged more complex forms of cooperation. The ability to rely on one another in changing environments created an early sense of identity shaped by group membership. Awareness of one's place within the group was a precursor to awareness of oneself as an individual. Animals in these landscapes added another dimension. Early humans observed the behavior of predators and prey, not just as threats or food sources, but as creatures whose patterns could be learned. They noticed where certain animals gathered, when they rested, how they hunted and how they reacted to danger. Understanding these patterns required attention and thought. It also required empathy at a basic level, the ability to imagine how another creature might behave. This wasn't empathy as we know it today. It wasn't emotional understanding. But it was recognition that other beings had their own ways of moving through the world. Seeing animals as more than moving objects helped early humans develop the cognitive foundation for seeing themselves with more depth too. Even weather shaped the growing awareness. Storms required shelter. Droughts forced groups to travel farther. Sudden changes in temperature required quick decisions. These experiences encouraged early humans to anticipate events before they happened. Anticipation is one of the key building blocks of self-awareness. It requires a mind that holds the future lightly in its thoughts, preparing for what might come. The more often early humans needed to anticipate changes, the more their minds strengthened this ability. Over generations, this repeated anticipation laid the groundwork for deeper forms of planning and reflection. Nighttime offered a different kind of landscape. Darkness was complete in a way most of us rarely experience. The only light came from the moon, the stars, and eventually fire. In this darkness, early humans relied on listening more than seeing. Sounds carried farther, movements became more pronounced. The night sharpened attention and created moments where the familiar world felt unfamiliar. In those moments, the mind could shift into a state of heightened awareness, paying close attention to every sound, every small change in the air. Night required a different mindset from day, and living through these daily shifts trained early humans to adjust their awareness regularly. Firelight introduced something even more important. Sitting around a fire meant safety from predators and warmth in cold nights. But it also meant time when hands could rest and eyes didn't have to scan the horizon. In those quiet moments, thoughts had room to drift. The flickering of flames created patterns that invited contemplation. Shadows on the ground moved in ways that might trigger memory or imagination. Firelight may have been one of the earliest environments where internal awareness could grow, simply because it created space for stillness. In stillness, the mind could explore more than immediate survival. All of these landscapes, open plains, dense forests, flowing rivers, mountains, caves, shifting climates, and nights lit by fire, worked together in shaping early human awareness. Each environment demanded different skills, different memories, and different ways of thinking. The minds of early humans expanded because the world required it. They learned to understand their surroundings not just as places they move through, but as systems with patterns that could be anticipated and used. This understanding wasn't reflective in the way we think of reflection now, but it laid the groundwork for reflection to emerge. The landscapes of the ancient world didn't just shape how early humans survived. They shaped how early humans thought. They created minds capable of connecting moments across time, capable of noticing internal states, capable of imagining possibilities, and eventually capable of recognizing themselves as beings who existed through time. Evening was one of the most important times in the lives of early humans, not because the day's work ended, but because the world itself changed in ways that made the mind behave differently. As daylight faded and the landscape darkened, vision lost its dominance. Sounds grew sharper, smells became more noticeable. Patterns that were obvious during the day disappeared, replaced by shapes and shadows that required closer attention. Night brought uncertainty, but it also brought something else. Fire! And with fire came one of the most significant shifts in early human awareness. Fire wasn't something our ancestors created overnight. They first observed it in nature, lightning strikes that set dry grass ablaze, volcanic activity that produced glowing rivers of heat, and even smaller fires caused by friction in certain environments. For a long time, humans kept their distance, watching from afar as flames changed the landscape. But over generations they learned to approach cautiously, then to carry embers, then to preserve flames that had started naturally. Eventually, they learned how to start fires themselves. But long before that skill developed, firelight created conditions that changed how minds worked. When early humans gathered around a fire, everything shifted. Darkness no longer meant full vulnerability. The warmth and glow created a circle of safety where predators hesitated to approach. Within that safe circle, early humans could finally stop moving for a while. They could sit together, rest their bodies, and breathe without needing to scan the horizon constantly. This shift from motion to stillness gave the mind space to wander inward, and wandering inward was one of the earlier steps toward memory, imagination, and eventually story. Memory took on new depth in these moments. During daylight, memory served survival, recognizing paths, recalling water sources, remembering which plants were safe. But at night, during quiet sitting, memory became something more flexible. Without immediate demands, the mind could revisit earlier events in ways that weren't tied to action. Someone might recall a hunt from months earlier, not because they needed to act on it, but because the sounds of the night or the crackle of the fire stirred the memory. These recollections didn't come with narration or language, but they were more complete than the fleeting instinctual memories of other animals. They carried emotional weight, fragments of experience, and a sense of personal continuity. This continuity, the idea that the same individual had lived through different moments, helped shape the first internal timelines. Early humans didn't say to themselves, "This happened long ago," but they felt the difference between now and earlier, between what was happening and what had happened. The firelight encouraged this because it allowed for reflection without distraction. Without it, nighttime would have been too dangerous for stillness and too dark for extended thought. Firelight became a kind of mental workspace, a steady, flickering backdrop against which memory could stretch further than it ever had. Beyond memory, imagination began to develop more fully in this environment. Imagination isn't just about novelty or creativity. At its root, imagination is the ability to picture something that isn't present. Early humans already had the beginnings of this skill when they used mental images to plan hunts or recall the shape of a tool they wanted to make, but firelight evenings broadened imagination in new ways. Watching flames flicker produced patterns in the mind that invited interpretation. Shadows cast on rocks and cave walls shifted in ways that might resemble animals, landscapes, or other figures. The mind naturally tried to make sense of these shapes, even without language. This act of interpreting shapes and shadows planted seeds for more abstract thinking. It encouraged early humans to explore mental possibilities beyond what they could see. When flames created movements on walls, the mind might associate those movements with memories of animals or people. These associations helped strengthen the mental ability to connect unrelated experiences. Over time, this ability became crucial in the formation of symbolic thought. Symbolic thought is the foundation of art, storytelling, and eventually written language. But its early spark may have ignited in these firelit moments where the mind was free to wander from one idea to another. The group itself played a significant role in this development. Firelight brought people together physically, creating an intimate space where individuals could observe each other more closely than during the day. Facial expressions became easier to read in the warm glow. Gestures became more noticeable. Early humans sitting together developed a stronger sense of social presence. They weren't just reacting to one another during hunts or foraging. They were watching each other in stillness, understanding emotions and intentions through subtle cues. This deeper social awareness strengthened the mind's ability to understand internal states, both in others and eventually in themselves. Some of the earliest forms of communication likely became more refined during these firelit evenings. During the day, communication was often functional and urgent. Warnings, signals, simple directives. At night, when survival pressures eased, vocalizations could stretch in new directions. Sounds could become more expressive. Gestures could become more illustrative. Early humans may have experimented with new noises, rhythms, or facial expressions simply because they had the time and safety to do so. These experiments weren't stories yet, but they laid the groundwork for shared meaning that wasn't tied directly to survival. Teaching also became more possible in this environment. During daylight hours, teaching happened through demonstration, showing how to use a tool, how to track an animal, how to gather food. At night, the group rested and the older members could share knowledge in ways that weren't rushed. They may have used gestures, sounds, or simple reenactments to convey lessons. The fire illuminated hands and faces, making it easier to follow demonstrations in detail. These lessons required minds that could hold on to concepts for longer stretches of time, strengthening memory and encouraging imaginative thinking about the future. While the group shared knowledge and rested, children observed everything. Young individuals in early human groups absorbed patterns of behavior long before they developed skills themselves. Watching adults interact, play with tools, or react to the sounds of the night shaped how their minds formed connections. The firelight environment likely helped young minds develop cognitive flexibility. They learned that some sounds belonged to specific animals, that certain gestures had particular meanings, and that familiar faces reacted differently depending on the situation. These early lessons formed the basis for understanding relationships, emotions, and roles within the group. Over generations, groups developed routines around firelight. Some individuals tended the flames, adding fuel and adjusting logs. Others prepared simple foods. Some watched the perimeter. These routines created a sense of shared purpose and reinforced group identity. Understanding one's role in these routines was another step towards self-awareness, because roles carried expectations. Recognizing that others expected something from you created a mental division between personal behavior and group needs. This awareness may have been subtle, but it encouraged individuals to think about how their actions affected others. Imagination continued to grow because nighttime placed fewer demands on attention. During the day, the mind was occupied with survival tasks. At night, after essential needs were met, there was room for quiet thought. Early humans may not have had the concept of thinking, but their minds wandered nonetheless. They revisited earlier experiences in new ways, considered possibilities, and practiced simple mental simulations. These simulations, the ability to picture what might happen, were crucial. They shaped decisions made the following day. They helped individuals prepare for hunts, recognize dangers sooner, and plan more effectively. As these mental abilities grew, so did the ability to form simple stories. Stories likely began not as entertainment but as a way to share important information. An older individual might gesture and vocalize to convey what had happened during a previous hunt. A parent might use expressive movement to explain how a predator behaved. These early recountings weren't structured narratives, but they were early forms of story because they connected events across time. They allowed one individual's experience to become part of the group's collective memory. Over time, these recountings grew more detailed. They incorporated not just actions, but emotions. They conveyed not just what happened, but how it felt. The ability to express feelings through gesture or sound strengthened the group's social cohesion. This deeper social cohesion placed even more importance on awareness of internal states. If one individual could understand how another felt, even in a basic way, it encouraged empathy, cooperation, and shared responsibility. These traits were essential for survival in harsh environments, but they also nurtured the growth of self-awareness. The firelight environment also encouraged the development of sequences in thought. Watching flames dance and shift created a natural rhythm. The mind followed that rhythm, noticing changes and predicting patterns. This simple act of following a sequence strengthened cognitive pathways that later supported more complex thinking. The flickering light, the crackle of burning wood, and the movement of shadows all created sensory input that shaped mental processes in subtle ways. At some point, individuals began creating marks or shapes on cave walls. These early markings weren't full representations yet, but they were deliberate. They required a mind capable of seeing something and deciding to record it. This act of recording wasn't story itself, but it was a step toward representation. Representation required a mind that could understand the relationship between a symbol and what it represented. Making marks in firelight encouraged this connection, strengthening symbolic thinking. Group behaviour during these evenings also shaped social understanding. Individuals shared food, warmth, and attention in ways that reinforced bonds. Observing these interactions taught young members how relationships functioned. They learned when to approach others, when to give space, and how to interpret subtle cues. These lessons in social navigation built the foundation for more complex emotional awareness later on. As imagination expanded, early humans may have begun practicing simple play. Play wasn't just for children. Adults may have engaged in playful interactions too, testing tools, mimicking animal sounds, or imitating movements. Play encouraged experimentation without risk. It strengthened creative thinking. It allowed minds to explore new possibilities without immediate survival pressures. Firelight provided the safety needed for such behaviour. Over countless generations, these evenings shaped the inner life of early humans. The combination of warmth, safety, social connection, visual stimulation, and cognitive rest created the ideal environment for deeper mental processes to develop. Memory became longer and more detailed. Imagination became more flexible. Communication became more expressive. And story, in its earliest form, emerged from the desire to share experiences across time. This wasn't deliberate. Early humans didn't decide to become more aware. The conditions created by firelight simply made it possible. As they sat together night after night, month after month, generation after generation, their minds developed new abilities because the environment supported those abilities. Over time, these small shifts led to something that would eventually become storytelling, self-recognition, and the understanding that the mind could hold ideas not tied to the immediate moment. Long before humans reached anything close to self-awareness, other animals had developed impressive mental abilities shaped by their own environments and needs. These abilities weren't stepping stones toward human consciousness, and they weren't incomplete versions of what humans would eventually develop. They were fully formed for the species that carried them, built by millions of years of evolution. But by living among these creatures, watching them, hunting them, avoiding them, and sometimes even cooperating with them, early humans learned that the world was filled with minds other than their own. And that recognition changed the way they understood themselves. Early humans had always paid attention to animals because survival demanded it. But as their awareness grew, they began noticing patterns that went beyond simple reactions. They saw that animals weren't just moving shapes in the landscape. They had goals, expectations, strategies, and emotions, even if early humans didn't have those concepts in words. Seeing these traits in other creatures forced early humans to consider the idea that minds existed outside their own bodies. And once that idea took hold, even in its most basic form, it nudged their awareness further inward. One of the first mental abilities early humans noticed in other animals was memory. Animals remembered where water sources were during dry seasons. They remembered which areas were safe for raising young. Predators remembered paths commonly used by prey. Some species returned to the same migration routes year after year, tracking patterns in the environment with a consistency that must have been astonishing to anyone watching closely. These patterns weren't instinct alone. They relied on experience, learning, and environmental cues. Elephants, for example, carried memories across generations. When a matriarch led her family to a water source remembered from years earlier, early humans who observed this behaviour were witnessing an impressive cognitive act, even if they didn't have the means to interpret it fully. Migratory birds crossed enormous distances with remarkable accuracy. Wolves coordinated hunts using communication and strategy. Primates recognized individuals in their group and understood their social relationships. These examples were everywhere in the world early humans inhabited. Minds were everywhere. Seeing minds in other animals didn't create self-awareness directly, but it sharpened early humans' understanding of behavior. If an animal's action could be influenced by what it remembered, felt, or intended, then the world was more complex than pure instinct. Early humans began recognizing that behavior had layers. They learned to anticipate what an animal might do next, not by reacting blindly, but by imagining the animal's point of view. This skill, imagining another creature's perspective, was one of the subtle steps that expanded early human thinking beyond the present moment. Consider an early human preparing for a hunt. It wasn't enough to know that a herd of animals was nearby. They had to anticipate where the herd would move, how it would react to predators, and how different individuals within the herd behaved. Understanding these patterns required a form of mental modelling. The hunter had to imagine the thoughts of animals, even in simple ways. They had to predict fear, hesitation, curiosity, and routine. This ability to infer the mental states of other beings pushed early humans toward deeper awareness of mental states in general, including their own. The growing awareness of animal minds wasn't limited to prey. Predators played an equally important role. Early humans observed the patience of big cats waiting in tall grass, the persistence of wild dogs tracking an injured animal for hours, and the strategic movement of hyenas circling a potential target. These predators weren't acting randomly. They understood timing, opportunity, and risk. They made decisions based on their understanding of the environment. Early humans who noticed these patterns had an advantage in both hunting and avoiding danger. But noticing required attention to thought-like behavior, not just instinctual movement. Some of the earliest lessons in risk and strategy likely came from watching predators interact with one another. A predator hesitating before approaching a herd, a scavenger waiting for the right moment to approach a kill, or a bird giving a warning call that affected the behavior of several species at once. All of these suggested a world full of intentional behavior. And if animals could behave with intention, then intention was something that existed outside the human body. Recognizing intention elsewhere made it easier to recognize it internally. Early humans also noticed emotional expressions in other animals. Anyone who spent time among them could see that animals experienced fear, comfort, excitement, and frustration. A mother protecting her young, a group member showing affection, an animal expressing distress through sound or posture. These weren't mechanical movements. They carried emotional meaning. Early humans who paid attention to these signals learned to read emotional states, not only in animals, but eventually in each other. This growing sensitivity to emotion was especially important for survival. Recognizing a predator's mood could mean the difference between safety and danger. Detecting nervousness in prey could help a hunter adjust their approach. Understanding the vocalizations of birds could indicate whether a predator was nearby. These insights weren't instinctive. They were learned, refined, and passed down through observation. Each new understanding added another layer to early human awareness. Interaction with other primates also played a significant role. Early humans shared territory with species whose behavior was surprisingly similar to their own. Observing these primates offered a mirror, even if early humans didn't recognize it as such. They saw grooming behavior that strengthened social bonds. They saw signs of conflict and reconciliation. They saw young individuals learning from adults. These behaviors mirrored early human dynamics and forced early humans to consider that social life functioned similarly across species. Primates also displayed problem-solving skills that early humans couldn't ignore. They used tools, navigated social hierarchies, and showed preferences for certain foods or individuals. Watching another creature use a tool suggests a mind capable of understanding cause and effect. And if another species could understand cause and effect, early humans were more likely to recognize it in themselves. The comparison wasn't deliberate, but the implications shaped their growing awareness. Certain animals showed evidence of self-recognition, long before humans became aware of themselves in the way we understand it today. Dolphins recognized themselves in reflections. Elephants reacted to the death of companions in ways that suggested an understanding of loss. Birds like crows and ravens solved puzzles that required planning and memory. These displays of cognition weren't seen through philosophical lenses. They were observed as behaviours that helped early humans survive. But the more early humans paid attention to these behaviours, the more they understood that the world was filled with thinking beings. Recognizing mental states in animals also influenced early human cooperation. When individuals in a group saw how animals communicated, signaled danger, or coordinated movements, they may have mirrored some of those patterns without consciously realizing it. Early human communication evolved in part by watching animals communicate. The earliest warning calls may have been inspired by the alarm calls of birds or mammals. Gestures used in hunts may have been shaped by observing the coordinated movements of pack animals. In this way, animal minds indirectly shaped human communication long before language existed. These interactions with animals also encouraged the development of patience. Successful hunting often required waiting, observing, and understanding timing. Patience is not purely instinctual. It is tied to mental control, anticipation, and emotional regulation. Watching animals taught early humans that timing mattered, that movement needed to be precise, and that the right moment could not be forced. This patience strengthened the ability to delay reaction and plan behaviour more deliberately. Those skills supported the development of deeper thought. Animals provided lessons in cooperation, not just for early humans, but for each other. Wolves hunting in coordinated groups showed early humans how shared effort could accomplish more than individual action. Social animals like elephants demonstrated the importance of group support in raising young. Birds migrating in flocks displayed the benefits of collective navigation. These lessons weren't consciously analysed, but they were observed and absorbed. Over generations, they influenced early human social behaviour. Understanding animal minds also required distinguishing between behaviour caused by instinct and behaviour caused by intention. This distinction wasn't clear at first, but the more early humans watched animals, the more they understood that behaviour had different sources. A startled animal might behave one way, while a strategic predator might behave another. Learning to differentiate these patterns sharpened early human perception and encouraged them to think more deeply about internal states. As early humans recognized similarities between their own behaviour and the behaviour of animals, a subtle shift occurred. They realized that some of their actions resembled those of other species: a parent comforting a child, a group working together to hunt, a pair of individuals showing preference for one another. These similarities weren't recognized in a symbolic way yet, but they planted the earliest seeds of identification. Recognizing similarity is one of the first steps toward understanding oneself. This recognition didn't diminish the uniqueness of human development. Instead, it highlighted the shared foundations of cognition across species. Early humans learned that intelligence came in many forms. Elephants remembered, wolves coordinated, birds communicated, primates strategized. Understanding these forms of intelligence showed early humans that minds had many shapes, and that their own minds were part of a larger continuum in the natural world. Over time, this awareness created a more nuanced understanding of the environment. The world was no longer a collection of dangers and resources. It was a place filled with other beings who acted according to their own needs and experiences. Seeing the world this way encouraged empathy in its earliest form. Empathy didn't appear as a concept or a moral choice. It emerged from repeated moments of noticing how others behaved and responding in ways that maintained group stability and survival. Recognition of animal minds also shaped early human spirituality, long before spirituality was recognized as such. While fully formed belief systems came much later, the early observation that animals had intentions, emotions, and experiences created a sense of continuity between species. Some animals were respected, feared, or admired. These ideas grew out of daily life, not abstract thought. They reflected an understanding that the world was full of living minds. As early humans continued developing their own awareness, The minds of animals served as a constant reminder that thought existed outside themselves. This recognition helped expand the concept of thinking from a personal experience to a shared characteristic of many living beings. It made early humans more observant, more reflective, and more capable of considering internal experiences. This growing understanding of animal behavior and animal minds eventually supported one of the biggest shifts in human cognition, the development of language. But before language fully formed, communication deepened in other ways. Gestures became more refined, sounds became more varied. The ability to share knowledge about animal behavior required a mental ability to describe behavior through sound and movement. This early communication pushed the mind forward, connecting observation with expression. As awareness of animal minds grew, so did the awareness of human minds. Early humans began noticing that their group members had similar reactions to certain situations. This recognition helped form the earlier sense of shared experience. And as shared experience took root, the path towards self-awareness grew clearer. As early humans grew more skilled at reading the minds of animals and the intentions of one another, something new began to form in the spaces between their gestures, their vocalizations, and their shared experiences. It didn't appear suddenly, and it didn't begin as anything close to the languages we speak today. It started as a subtle shift in the way sounds carried meaning. The breath that had once been used only for cries, warnings, and simple signals began to shape itself into something that organized the world in new ways. This slow transformation created one of the most profound steps towards self-awareness, because language did more than help early humans communicate. It gave structure to thought. Before spoken language emerged, early humans relied heavily on gestures, facial expressions, and context. A motion of the hand could signal danger. A certain posture could invite cooperation. A shared glance during a hunt could coordinate movement. These nonverbal forms of communication were powerful, but they were limited by distance, lighting, and the constraints of the environment. Sound offered something different. It could travel far. It could carry through dense forests, across grasslands, and in the dark. It could link minds even when individuals couldn't see each other. But for sound to become language, it needed a deeper connection between noise and meaning. Early human vocalizations were likely similar to those used by other primates. Calls for alarm, sounds for food, signals for social contact. These vocalizations conveyed emotion and urgency, but not detailed information. Over time, though, as minds grew more flexible, early humans began experimenting with variations in sound. A longer call might indicate one type of danger, a shorter one might signal another, a particular tone might mean immediate action, while another suggested caution. These differences weren't yet words, but they were distinctions, and each distinction added depth to communication. The breath behind these early sounds played a crucial role. Breath is the hidden force behind speech, the physical mechanism that allows sound to change rapidly and intentionally. Early humans didn't think about breath as a tool, but their bodies learned how to control it in ways that supported increasingly varied vocalizations. This control allowed them to expand their range of expressions, making communication more precise. With greater control of breath came the ability to shape sounds into patterns, and these patterns began carrying more meaning. Communication grew more complex because early humans needed it to. Cooperation in hunts required nuanced signals. Sharing food demanded fairness and coordination. Teaching tool-making skills to the young required ways of drawing attention to specific actions. Social disagreements required negotiation. Without communication beyond instinctual cries, these tasks would have remained limited. But as early humans experimented with sound, they discovered that certain vocalizations consistently produced certain reactions. Over generations, these consistent connections between sound and behavior formed the earliest roots of meaningful communication. One of the most significant shifts occurred when early humans began using sounds not just to react to the present moment, but to refer to things not immediately visible. A sound that originally signaled the presence of a predator might begin to be used in a different context, perhaps to warn about a place where predators had been seen before. This transfer of meaning required memory and imagination. It required a mind capable of thinking about something not physically present. Once early humans began using sounds in this referential way, communication expanded into a new territory. These referential sounds became building blocks of early language. They weren't arranged into sentences, and they weren't tied to grammar, but they carried meaning more reliably than earlier calls. Individuals learned these sounds by observing how others reacted to them. Over generations, groups developed shared sets of vocal signals that conveyed important information. These sets varied from group to group depending on the environment, social structure, and cultural traditions. The beginnings of dialects appeared long before full language did. As early humans used more vocalizations, the relationship between sound and meaning became more flexible. They learned that a particular sound could be associated with a specific object or action. A certain sound might signal water, another might indicate a tool, another might refer to a nearby group member. These associations weren't taught deliberately. They emerged naturally from repeated interactions. Young individuals learned them by listening and watching, forming connections in their minds that mirrored the connections held by adults. Each new association strengthened the cognitive ability to link sound with concept. This process changed how early humans perceived the world. Before language, the world existed primarily through direct experience. After language began to form, the world existed in part through shared meaning. A place where food could be found wasn't just a place. It became a concept that could be referred to through sound. This meant early humans no longer needed to rely solely on personal memory. They could access the memory of the group through communication. This shift expanded the mental world in ways that went far beyond the physical environment. As communication grew more sophisticated, early humans began assigning sounds to more abstract ideas. These ideas weren't fully abstract in the way modern humans understand them, but they involved categories of experience rather than specific objects. A sound might refer to danger in general rather than a specific predator. Another might refer to a type of action, such as gathering or travelling. The ability to generalize meaning allowed early humans to share information more efficiently. It also allowed their minds to group experiences into categories, a process essential for deeper thought. Over many generations, these early forms of vocal communication grew more complex. Groups developed different sets of sounds depending on their environment and needs. Those who lived near water developed sounds related to fishing and coastal resources. Those in grasslands developed sounds linked to herds and migration. Those in forests created sounds that helped them coordinate movement through dense terrain. These variations shaped culture long before culture was recognized as such. The development of early language wasn't just a cognitive shift, it was a social one. Social dynamics played a crucial role in this development. As groups grew larger and more interconnected, communication became increasingly important. Conflicts needed resolution. Bonds needed reinforcement. Cooperation needed coordination. The ability to communicate effectively enhanced group survival, and as a result, individuals with stronger communicative abilities had evolutionary advantages. This pressure encouraged the development of more refined vocal control and more complex mental structures behind communication. The rise of early language also supported teaching in new ways. Before vocal communication advanced, teaching relied heavily on observation. Young individuals watched adults and imitated their actions. With the development of vocal signals, adults could draw attention more directly to specific actions, tools, or dangers. They could indicate that something needed to be noticed. This made teaching more efficient, and efficient teaching allowed knowledge to accumulate more quickly across generations. The accumulation of knowledge created a new kind of cultural memory. Instead of relying solely on personal experience, early humans could pass down information through repeated vocal patterns. These patterns kept important knowledge alive even when individuals who first discovered it were no longer present. Cultural memory strengthened the link between generations and created a sense of continuity that extended beyond a single lifetime. This continuity supported the development of self-awareness by encouraging individuals to see themselves as part of a larger timeline, connected to both ancestors and descendants. As communication expanded, it allowed early humans to create more complex social structures. Group members could coordinate roles, share responsibilities, and organize activities with greater precision. Social rules began forming, even if they weren't codified or consciously understood. These rules helped regulate behavior and reduce conflict. Understanding and following these rules required awareness of one's place within the group, another important step toward recognizing oneself as an individual. The experience of living in a group that communicated through sound changed the way early humans thought about themselves. They began to use communication not only for practical purposes, but also to express emotions, desires, and frustrations. Emotional expression through sound strengthened bonds between individuals. If someone expressed distress, others responded. If someone expressed satisfaction, it shaped group behavior. These interactions deepened social understanding and encouraged early humans to reflect on their own emotions, even if reflection was still a simple process. Gradually, the sounds used by early humans became more variable. They combined in new ways, producing sequences that carried layered meaning. These combinations weren't sentences, but they were more nuanced than single signals. For example, one sound might indicate food, and another might indicate location. Used together, they could guide others to a food source. The ability to combine sounds into sequences was a major cognitive leap. It showed that early humans were beginning to manipulate symbols in structured ways. As sequences grew more complex, they began to represent more complex ideas. The ability to refer to past events grew stronger. The ability to discuss future actions became possible. Early humans started to share plans rather than rely on instinctive coordination. This required imagination, because planning meant thinking ahead. It also required memory, because describing a past event meant recalling it accurately enough for others to understand. The interplay between memory and imagination deepened the internal mental world. The development of early language also changed how individuals understood their own thoughts. Before language, thoughts existed as sensations, impulses, or vague impressions. With the rise of meaningful sounds, thoughts could be shaped into something more stable. Language allowed early humans to hold ideas for longer periods. If a sound represented an object or a concept, the mind could return to that concept repeatedly, reinforcing the pathway between sound and meaning. This reinforcement created a more cohesive internal world. In time, vocal communication became rich enough to support early forms of symbolic thought. Symbolic thought is the ability to let one thing stand for another. A sound could stand for a place. A gesture could stand for an action. A pattern of sounds could stand for a shared memory. Symbolic thought is one of the most important steps in the development of self-awareness because it allows the mind to travel beyond immediate experience. It allows the mind to connect events, understand relationships, and form concepts. With symbolic thought came the possibility of shared imagination. Individuals could imagine something together and use sound to coordinate their imagined ideas. This created space for cultural traditions, rituals, and shared narratives to emerge naturally over generations. These early cultural developments strengthened group cohesion and deepened the sense of belonging. Belonging encouraged reflection because individuals needed to understand themselves in relation to others. Language, even in its earliest forms, began shaping internal experience as much as external communication. It helped early humans understand emotions, categorize experiences, and anticipate outcomes. It gave them the ability to explain behavior, even in simple ways. The rise of language didn't just expand communication, it expanded consciousness. It created a world inside the mind as rich as the one outside it. Early humans' minds no longer stopped at simple communication or immediate needs. They carried images from past experiences, held fragments of memory that resurfaced unexpectedly, and experimented with ideas that didn't have a direct purpose. These new kinds of thoughts appeared quietly, without ceremony, in the long rhythm of daily life. They had no words to describe what was happening inside them, but their behaviour began to reflect an expanding mental landscape. And over time, this deepening internal world began leaving marks on the physical world as well. Much of this shift happened slowly, during ordinary moments. Someone collecting stones might notice that one had a pattern unlike the others. Instead of discarding it, they might turn it over in their hands more than once, trying to understand what made it feel distinct. Another person preparing a tool might find themselves lingering on the sharpness of an edge, imagining its eventual use before striking the next blow. These moments weren't planned. They were small signs of a mind capable of holding more than a single idea at a time, capable of imagining possibilities not tied to immediate action. One of the strongest influences on this change was the growing ability to recall images in the absence of the things they represented. Early humans had always remembered experiences, but now those memories began resurfacing in more flexible ways. A person might see an animal during the day, then find the animal's shape returning to their thoughts later in the evening. This wasn't storytelling yet, and it wasn't symbolic thinking in the full sense, but it was a shift from memory as a tool for survival toward memory as a place where imagination could take hold. The mind was beginning to create a space where thoughts could exist apart from the physical world. This new mental space became even more active in the environment of firelight. In earlier ages, nighttime was defined primarily by vulnerability, but once early humans learned to tend and preserve fire, the hours after sunset transformed into a time of reflection, pattern-seeking and quiet observation. Flames created movement that engaged the mind in ways daylight rarely did. Shadows lengthened and changed shape as logs settled and cracked. Colours shifted from deep red to soft orange and back again. These changes invited attention and created room for the mind to explore thoughts that didn't have immediate consequences. Someone sitting near the fire might notice a shadow on the cave wall that resembled an animal seen earlier that day. Without intending to, their mind might connect the two images. The shadow wasn't the animal, but it suggested it. That realization, small as it seems, was one of the earliest forms of symbolic thinking. It showed that the mind could let one thing stand for another. This ability opened the door for countless new possibilities. Once the mind understood that a shape could represent something else, it could create new shapes intentionally to represent things that mattered. Early humans didn't start drawing as a form of art. Their first marks were practical. Scratches on a piece of wood might indicate the number of something gathered. Cuts on a stick might help keep track of seasonal cycles or the passing of days before a particular migration. These marks weren't beautiful in any deliberate sense. They were tools. But once the idea of marking information became familiar, the mind began experimenting with marks that didn't serve a direct practical purpose. Someone might drag a finger through dust and notice a line. They might add another line next to it. The pattern might remind them of something, even if only faintly. That faint connection was enough to support the early development of artistic thought. Over time, these experiments grew more deliberate. When early humans found safe spaces inside caves, the smooth surfaces of the rock walls became places where curiosity could take physical form. These places were naturally protected from rain, wind, and light. They held the marks made upon them much longer than the open air would have allowed. When someone dragged a piece of charcoal or ochre across the wall, the pigment stuck. It didn't wash away immediately. The mark remained. Seeing a mark stay in place changed how the mind thought about representation. It encouraged early humans to think about images not only as fleeting impressions, but as something stable, something that could be returned to. The earliest lines were likely simple: a curve, a dot, a shape resembling the arc of a branch or the slope of a hill. These shapes didn't need to be precise. They were experiments, not depictions. But as individuals grew accustomed to seeing their own marks and the marks of others, the urge to refine them grew stronger. Someone might add a shape next to a previous one. Another might adjust the angle or size. Through repetition, these marks began to resemble things from the world outside. A long line might evoke the outline of an animal's back. A cluster of shorter marks might mimic the shape of a herd. These weren't yet drawings the way we think of them, but they were the earliest signs that humans could intentionally create images that held meaning. This shift didn't result from sudden insight or a single creative moment. It grew from thousands of small acts of observation. Early humans were constantly surrounded by patterns, footprints in the dirt, the arrangement of leaves on branches, the tracks left by animals in soft earth. Their eyes followed these patterns naturally, and their minds learned to anticipate how certain shapes formed and changed. When they began creating marks on cave walls, they were using the same pattern recognition skills they used in tracking and navigating the landscape, but now those patterns were being created intentionally rather than found. As marks on cave walls became more refined, they began to serve purposes beyond simple representation. They became a way to record movement or to teach others about the behavior of animals. A series of lines might show the direction of a herd. A cluster of shapes might represent a dangerous area. These early images were more functional than symbolic, but they allowed early humans to share knowledge through visual means rather than solely through sound or gesture. This expanded their ability to communicate ideas that were too complex for vocal sounds alone. This growing visual communication supported the development of symbolic thinking. For a symbol to work, the mind must understand that a mark is not the thing it represents, it stands in for it. Once early humans understood that idea, even at a basic level, their minds could begin playing with representation in new ways. They could draw not just what they saw but what they remembered. They could draw what they hoped to see or what they feared. These images began to hold emotional meaning. A drawing of a predator wasn't just an image. It carried the memory of danger. A drawing of a successful hunt carried the memory of survival. As cave markings grew more detailed, they also became more communal. Groups began leaving marks in the same spaces, building visual histories on the walls. These shared images formed an early kind of social memory. They helped connect individuals to the experiences of others. If someone saw a drawing made by a member of their group who had already passed away, they were witnessing an early connection to the past that wasn't based solely on spoken communication. This link between present and past deepened the sense of continuity across generations. The appearance of more deliberate drawings, especially those of animals, revealed something profound about early human thought. Animals were central to survival, but they also occupied a large part of early humans' mental lives. They were objects of fear, sources of food, and competitors for territory. Drawing them gave early humans a way to engage with these creatures mentally rather than physically. It allowed them to practice understanding animal shapes, movements, and behaviors in ways that complemented their real-world observations. This mental practice strengthened their cognitive abilities. It deepened memory, improved pattern recognition, and expanded imagination. At some point, humans also began creating shapes that didn't correspond directly to anything in the world. These abstract shapes weren't fully symbolic yet, but they were explorations of form, rhythm, and repetition. Someone might draw a sequence of lines simply because the act of repeating the stroke felt satisfying or familiar. Another might experiment with shapes that changed gradually along a surface. These markings reflected early humans' growing interest in the act of creation itself. Creating something for no immediate purpose signaled a major shift in cognitive behavior. It meant the mind was capable of finding value in activities that didn't offer direct survival benefits. Alongside these visual developments, imagination continued to grow. Imagination wasn't simply about inventing new ideas. It was about being able to hold mental images, combine them, and manipulate them. The mind could picture an animal moving across a landscape without the animal being present. It could relive a past hunt or anticipate a future one. It could even imagine events that had never happened. This ability helped early humans prepare for challenges before they arose. It also gave structure to dreams. Dreams had existed long before this stage of human development, as they do in many animals. But as the human mind became richer with memory and imagery, dreams took on new forms. They began incorporating elements of experience with elements of imagination. Someone might dream of an animal they had seen, but in a situation that never occurred. They might dream of landscapes combined in ways that didn't exist. These dreams weren't interpreted or shared deliberately at first, but the mind experienced them nonetheless, and dreams contributed to the development of more complex symbolic thinking by blending memory and invention in ways waking thought rarely allowed. As humans created images on cave walls, these dreams may have become easier to recall. Seeing images by firelight could trigger associations with dreams experienced during the night. The images might reinforce dream memories or inspire new dreams. This interplay between visual representation and subconscious experience helped strengthen the mental pathways that support imagination. The first deliberate artistic act likely emerged from this blending of memory, imagination, and symbol. The earliest known figurines created by early humans weren't perfect representations. They were simplified, exaggerated, or stylized. These qualities suggest that early humans were focusing on certain features that carried particular importance rather than attempting realistic depictions. This selective emphasis was another sign of symbolic thinking, because it showed that early humans were representing not just the physical form, but the mental concept of the object. Once humans began shaping materials intentionally, carving bone, moulding clay, arranging stones, they were practicing the ability to transform the physical world in ways that reflected their inner world. These acts didn't require complex language or reflective consciousness, but they did require imagination and symbolic thought. They required a mind that could picture a finished form and work toward it step by step. As these abilities continued to grow, early humans began using symbols for purposes that weren't purely practical. Some symbols may have been markers of group identity, others may have represented significant events. Some marks might have been used to guide rituals, or to communicate ideas that couldn't be expressed easily through vocal sounds. We don't know exactly what these early symbols meant, but their presence tells us that early humans were experimenting with layers of meaning, using marks to convey ideas shaped by their inner experiences. These strange new thoughts, the ones that emerged from memory, imagination, and symbol, pushed the mind toward even deeper forms of awareness. They taught early humans that the world inside their heads could influence the world outside. They encouraged exploration of ideas not tied to immediate survival. They made room for emotions, memories, and fears to take shape in physical form. The growing world inside early humans' minds didn't develop in isolation. It expanded in the middle of groups, small mobile communities made up of individuals who depended on one another every day. These communities shaped consciousness in ways the environment alone never could have. No single person could survive without the help of others. This simple fact meant that early humans needed to understand one another deeply, even before they fully understood themselves. The movement of communities, their shared responsibilities, and the constant exchange of attention created conditions where consciousness could grow layer by layer. Life in these communities was dynamic. People were rarely still for long. They travelled across large areas following seasonal patterns, animal migrations, and resource availability. This movement required planning and coordination, but it also required trust. Each individual had a role to play, and the success of the group depended on everyone fulfilling those roles. A person who gathered plants needed to know which landscapes offered the best resources. A skilled tracker relied on others to interpret subtle signals during a hunt. Someone responsible for maintaining tools depended on the group to protect those tools during travel. This interdependence encouraged minds to think beyond personal needs. It created a sense of being part of something larger. The need to coordinate travel across different environments pushed early humans to develop more complex forms of communication. Gestures, vocal signals, and shared routines helped groups move as a cohesive unit. Moving together required an understanding of timing, pace, and direction. It required individuals to pay constant attention to the behavior of others. When someone slowed down, others noticed. When someone quickened their pace, others adjusted. These small adjustments strengthened the ability to read intentions and anticipate changes. This kind of awareness extended beyond simple observation. It was a form of social thinking that made each individual more attuned to the mind around them. The responsibilities within the group weren't evenly distributed. Some individuals took on certain roles naturally. A person with a keen sense of hearing might excel at predicting danger in dense forests. Someone with exceptional memory might recall distant water sources. A person with steady hands might become skilled at shaping tools. These roles weren't formal, but they were understood. Recognizing personal strength and weakness was one of the earliest forms of self-understanding. It wasn't introspection in the way we know it, but it was an awareness of personal ability within the context of the group. Watching others perform their roles also encouraged learning. Younger individuals observed skilled group members and imitated their actions. They practiced by trial and error, guided by the reactions of adults. This learning process required attention and patience. It created opportunities for teaching that didn't exist in solitary life. When older individuals demonstrated how to shape a tool or prepare a hide, they were doing more than showing a technique. They were passing down knowledge, reinforcing cultural memory, and supporting the growth of shared understanding. This shared understanding became the foundation of collective identity. Collective identity shaped consciousness by giving individuals a sense of belonging. Belonging encouraged them to consider how their actions affected the group. It encouraged cooperation and discouraged behavior that could cause harm. These social expectations weren't formal rules, but they were enforced through subtle cues, gestures, vocalizations, changes in posture. Individuals who acted in ways that disrupted group harmony faced the risk of isolation, which could be dangerous. This pressure encouraged early humans to monitor their behavior, creating a form of early self-regulation. Self-regulation required awareness of internal impulses and the ability to control them, both of which supported the development of deeper consciousness. Traveling in groups also required early humans to navigate complex social relationships. Bonds formed naturally within families, but bonds also developed between individuals who weren't closely related. Cooperation across these relationships created an intricate network of connections. Maintaining these connections required empathy, even in early forms. Empathy allowed one individual to sense when another was distressed, uncertain, or content. This sensitivity strengthened cooperation and created more stable groups. It also supported the development of emotional awareness, because understanding someone else's emotional state made it easier to recognize one's own. Within these communities, leadership began to appear, although not in the structured sense we think of today. Leadership emerged from experience and trust. A skilled hunter might guide others during a hunt. An elder with strong memory might direct the group's movement through unfamiliar terrain. Someone with good judgment might help settle disagreements. These leadership roles required the leader to think about the group as a whole, not just personal needs. This broader perspective encouraged strategic thinking, long-term planning, and emotional control. These traits helped shape early intellectual growth and strengthen the roots of conscious thought. Disagreements inevitably arose within groups, but resolving them required negotiation rather than aggression. Aggression threatened group stability, so individuals learned to use gestures, expressions, and vocal signals to express frustration or assert dominance in less harmful ways. The ability to resolve conflicts without violence strengthened social bonds and reinforced the importance of communication. These interactions required early humans to understand how their actions influenced others. This understanding supported the development of a social self, an awareness shaped by interactions rather than internal reflection alone. Daily life within communities involved constant cooperation. Food gathering required coordination, especially in environments where resources were scattered. Hunting required small groups to work together with precise timing and quiet signals. Care for children was shared, with many individuals helping protect and nurture the young. This shared parenting strengthened emotional bonds and created a sense of shared responsibility. Recognizing that the group depended on them created motivation to contribute, which encouraged early humans to think about consequences before acting. This forward-thinking mindset supported the development of consciousness by linking present actions with future outcomes. Another important influence came from the way early humans supported one another during sickness or injury. Unlike many other animals, early humans cared for injured group members long enough for them to recover. This care required patience, empathy, and an understanding of physical limitation. When someone was unable to move quickly or gather food, others compensated. This support strengthened group cohesion and deepened emotional understanding. It also encouraged early humans to consider the vulnerability of others, which in turn helped them understand their own vulnerability. Recognizing vulnerability required self-awareness, even in a basic form. Resting together also shaped social understanding. During moments of rest, often by firelight, groups spent time in close proximity. In these moments, individuals observed one another's habits, moods, and routines. They learned who was quick to laugh, who became tense easily, who took longer to wake, who preferred solitude, and who sought comfort from others. These observations weren't labelled with concepts or words, but they helped early humans develop an awareness of personality differences. Recognizing personality differences required a mind that could track consistent patterns in behavior. This skill strengthened memory, pattern recognition, and emotional understanding. Different generations living together added another layer of complexity. Elders carried knowledge from many seasons and helped guide the group. Young children required constant attention and shaped the behavior of adults around them. Adolescents tested boundaries and explored new ideas. Each age group offered different perspectives and created different social challenges. Navigating these interactions required flexibility, patience, and the ability to anticipate reactions from individuals at different stages of life. This variety of perspectives helped early humans understand that minds developed and changed. Recognizing change in others encouraged individuals to recognize change within themselves. As communities moved from place to place, they encountered neighboring groups. These encounters might be cooperative, neutral, or hostile. Early humans needed to understand the differences between familiar individuals and unfamiliar ones. This distinction required the ability to categorize social relationships and assign different behaviors to each category. Understanding our group versus other groups shaped social awareness and created early forms of identity tied to community membership. Identity expanded beyond personal ability or family role. It became linked to the group itself. Some encounters between groups led to the exchange of knowledge. Individuals might observe other groups using different tools or gathering different resources. These observations encouraged curiosity and experimentation. They also demonstrated that knowledge existed beyond one's own community. This realization encouraged early humans to think beyond familiar boundaries. It suggested that other minds, shaped by different experiences, held different kinds of understanding. Recognizing this diversity supported the development of a more flexible consciousness. Seasonal movement played a significant role in shaping group behavior. During migration, the group needed to respond to changing conditions, weather, availability of food, shifting animal patterns, and landscape challenges. Responding effectively required attention to detail, planning, and cooperation. Groups developed routines that helped them adapt to these changes. These routines reinforced social roles, strengthened memory, and encouraged individuals to anticipate future needs. The mental ability to plan migration routes and respond to unpredictable environmental shifts pushed consciousness further. Resource scarcity also influenced the growth of consciousness. When food was abundant, cooperation came easily. When resources were scarce, individuals needed to negotiate and share carefully to maintain group stability. Scarcity tested emotional control and encouraged early humans to think long-term rather than react impulsively. These moments strengthened the ability to delay gratification and consider the needs of others alongside personal needs. These forms of self-regulation were essential for the development of conscious decision-making. As early humans learned to navigate these challenges together, they also learned to celebrate moments of success, a successful hunt, the discovery of a new water source, or the safe birth of a child created collective joy. This joy wasn't reflective or ceremonial yet, but it strengthened bonds through shared emotion. Feeling emotion as part of a group helped shape the early human understanding of shared experience. Shared experience contributed to a sense of unity, creating a mental framework where individuals understood themselves in relation to the group. The need to coordinate tasks and maintain group cohesion encouraged the development of more refined communication. Vocal signals became more varied, gestures became more detailed. Rhythmic patterns of movement or sound emerged during group activities. This shared communication supported the development of early culture. Culture wasn't recognized as such, but it existed through repeated actions, shared beliefs, and common expectations. Culture shaped consciousness by giving individuals a framework for interpreting their environment and their social relationships. Living in communities also introduced early humans to the idea of roles beyond survival. Some individuals may have shown particular skill in resolving conflicts. Others may have had a calming influence or a talent for motivating others. These qualities created roles that weren't tied to physical tasks. They were social roles, shaped by personality and emotional intelligence. Recognizing these roles required early humans to understand others' internal states in more nuanced ways. This deeper understanding supported the development of a richer sense of self and a clearer sense of identity within the group. Over time, the movement of communities and the pressures of group living encouraged early humans to think more deeply about consequences, relationships, and patterns. They developed mental models of how others behaved, learned from shared experiences, and relied on collective memory to guide their decisions. These processes strengthen the cognitive structures that support conscious thought. Consciousness didn't emerge from physical survival alone. It grew in the spaces between individuals, in the shared effort to live, move, and adapt together. As these mental abilities strengthened, early humans became more skilled at recognizing patterns in weather, animal behavior, and social dynamics. They learned to anticipate changes before they happened, and to coordinate responses across the group. This anticipation required a mind capable of tracking past experiences and imagining future possibilities. It required a sense of time that went beyond immediate moments. This deepening temporal awareness supported the growth of self-awareness, because understanding time meant understanding oneself as an individual who existed across time. All these developments, shared memory, coordinated movement, emotional connection, conflict resolution, teaching, learning, and mutual support, created a foundation for consciousness to grow. Early humans didn't plan to become more aware. Their awareness deepened naturally through the demands of living in communities that depended on cooperation, understanding, and shared knowledge. The world early humans lived in was never still. The land beneath their feet shifted over generations, not dramatically enough for any single person to witness the whole change, but steadily enough that each new generation grew up in a landscape slightly different from the one their parents had known. These shifts didn't happen with warnings or explanations. They arrived through changes in wind, temperature, rainfall, and the movements of animals that depended on those patterns. Early humans didn't understand the concept of climate, but they felt its effects every day, and those effects shaped their minds in ways as profound as anything else in their environment. The changing climate brought challenges that were impossible to ignore. Cooler periods pushed forests back and expanded open grasslands. Warmer periods encouraged vegetation to spread, creating denser environments full of new plant life and new hiding places for animals. Dry years forced communities to travel farther for water. Wet years opened new opportunities for gathering and hunting. These shifts required early humans to adapt constantly, and adaptation required mental flexibility. A mind capable of navigating these changes became more skilled at predicting outcomes, adjusting strategies, and creating new solutions when old ones no longer worked. One of the earliest cognitive pressures created by climate involved tracking seasonal cycles. Even before early humans developed complex language or long-term planning, they relied on patterns in temperature, daylight, and animal movement to survive. They noticed when certain plants sprouted or when particular animals returned to familiar paths, but climate shifts changed these patterns. A season that once brought abundant resources might suddenly bring scarcity. An animal migration route might shift by many miles. Recognizing these changes required heightened attention and a willingness to abandon expectations. The growing ability to compare past experience with present conditions strengthened early memory and encouraged the mind to look beyond the immediate moment. These environmental changes also encouraged early humans to share knowledge more effectively. When a group noticed a shift in resources or a change in animal behavior, they needed to communicate this information across the entire community. Individuals who experienced a drought might teach the young to search for water in new places. Groups that encountered emerging dangers needed to inform others. These exchanges deepened the importance of communication and created a stronger sense of shared understanding. This shared understanding reinforced social bonds and supported the development of collective intelligence, where the group's combined knowledge exceeded what any individual could hold alone. Movement also became more significant during times of climate shift. Communities already travelled regularly, but changes in weather patterns intensified the need for relocation. When rivers dried or froze, when grasslands shifted, when forest edges moved, humans followed. This movement required awareness of geography far beyond the immediate surroundings. Groups learned to remember distant landmarks, safe resting places, and reliable food sources across vast areas. Holding a mental map of such a large territory encouraged the mind to think spatially in new ways. These spatial skills supported navigation, hunting, and understanding of broader environmental patterns. Climate shifts created uncertainty, and uncertainty made planning essential. The ability to anticipate scarcity helped groups survive difficult years. If the climate grew colder, early humans needed to gather more food, store resources, or migrate earlier. Planning these actions required the mind to consider the future in more detail. The future was no longer an abstract extension of the present. It became a practical aspect of daily life. This need to plan shaped the mind into something capable of imagining multiple outcomes and choosing between them. It also trained the mind to stay attentive to signals that might indicate changes ahead. As early humans adapted to shifting climates, they also observed changes in the behavior of animals. Some species migrated earlier or later depending on temperatures. Others found new habitats as vegetation patterns changed. Animals reacted to environmental cues long before humans understood them consciously. By tracking these behaviors, early humans learned to read the environment through the actions of those animals. A sudden absence of a familiar herd might indicate environmental stress. The arrival of birds in new areas might signal shifting weather patterns. Learning to interpret these signs required a deeper understanding of cause and effect. It encouraged the mind to search for connections beyond the obvious. Innovation often emerged during periods of environmental stress. When a familiar resource became scarce, early humans experimented with new tools or new techniques. They learned to sharpen stones more efficiently, to dig deeper for water, or to construct shelters that offered more protection from wind and cold. These innovations weren't sudden inventions. They were gradual improvements shaped by trial, error, and observation. Each improvement strengthened problem-solving skills and encouraged the mind to explore possibilities rather than relying solely on tradition. Over time, this willingness to experiment supported the development of creative thought. Climate variation also affected the distribution of different groups across large regions. As some areas became less habitable, groups migrated into new territories, sometimes encountering other human communities. These encounters created opportunities for sharing knowledge and exchanging ideas. When groups met, they observed new tools, unfamiliar techniques, and different ways of organizing daily life. Exposure to these differences broadened the cognitive horizons of early humans. It introduced them to alternative solutions and encouraged them to evaluate the effectiveness of different methods. This evaluation required comparison, judgment, and the ability to adopt new ideas when they proved useful. These encounters also shaped social dynamics. Groups needed to decide whether to avoid, approach, or cooperate with unfamiliar communities. Avoidance required caution and stealth. Cooperation required communication, negotiation, and trust. Cooperation between groups sometimes led to the exchange of resources or the formation of temporary alliances. These interactions forced early humans to think beyond their immediate social circles. They began to recognize that others outside their community had minds, intentions, and experiences worth understanding. This awareness supported the growth of empathy and broadened the social understanding that underlies consciousness. Climate also shaped how early humans interacted with technology. During colder periods, they developed better clothing and more effective ways to process hides. In wetter climates, they adapted tools for fishing or gathering in dense vegetation. Climate extremes forced creativity, pushing individuals to revise existing tools or develop new ones. Each new adaptation required the maker to visualize a problem and imagine a solution. This visualization strengthened the mental framework that supports imagination and planning. It also connected individuals to their tools in more meaningful ways, because those tools carried the work of thought in their creation. Some of the most significant cognitive developments emerged when climate shift forced early humans to build shelters more carefully. Shelters had to provide protection from wind, rain, snow, and predators. They needed to last longer and function more reliably. Constructing such shelters required knowledge of materials, structural stability, and spatial arrangement. These tasks strengthened spatial reasoning and encouraged early humans to think about how objects related to one another. They learned to imagine structures before building them, modifying designs as needed. This ability to visualize improvements in advance supported the growth of complex thought. Climate instability also affected the cycles of plant growth. Plants bloomed earlier, later, or not at all depending on temperature and rainfall. Early humans who collected plants needed to understand these patterns and adjust their timing accordingly. This required a sense of when different seasons began and ended, and how variations affected the landscape. These shifts taught early humans to pay closer attention to the subtle cues of the environment, slight changes in colour, texture, or scent. At the same time, these plant patterns reinforced memory and encouraged the mind to connect experiences across years rather than days or weeks. Among the most profound effects of climate change was the increasing importance of fire. Fire offered warmth during cold periods, helped cook food in ways that improved nutrition, and provided protection during long nights. Maintaining fire required skill and vigilance. Groups learned to protect embers, gather fuel, and preserve flames through storms. This responsibility strengthened cooperation and shared purpose. It also required individuals to anticipate future needs. Someone needed to gather extra wood before winter. Someone else needed to check that the fire remained stable through the night. These responsibilities were small but significant steps towards sustained planning. The nutritional benefits of cooking may have influenced cognitive development as well. Cooked food provided more calories and required less energy to digest. These changes allowed early humans to allocate more energy to brain function. Over generations, this may have supported the growth of more complex neural structures. A mind with more neural capacity could hold more information, process it more efficiently, and form deeper connections between memories and ideas. Climate, by influencing resource availability and the need for cooking, indirectly supported this growth. Changing climates also required early humans to adapt emotionally. Stress from scarcity, danger, or unpredictable weather pushed individuals to develop resilience. Emotional resilience supported decision-making and allowed individuals to remain calm in challenging situations. When weather patterns changed suddenly, or conditions became harsh, emotionally stable individuals were better able to guide the group. Emotional regulation required awareness of internal states. It required recognizing fear, frustration, or confusion, and finding ways to manage them. This internal awareness helped shape the foundations of conscious emotional experience. The shift in climate also created moments of opportunity. During certain periods, abundant resources allowed groups to rest more, experiment more, and explore new areas without immediate threat. These opportunities supported creativity and curiosity. Groups with more free time could devote energy to refining tools, developing new techniques, and strengthening social bonds. These periods of abundance supported cultural development and gave early humans more space to think about experiences beyond survival. They might practice shaping objects, observe animal behavior in detail, or experiment with new sounds or gestures. These activities nurtured imagination and symbolic thought. Cultural practices that emerged during stable periods persisted through more difficult times. The ability to rely on cultural memory helped groups survive when conditions worsened. Cultural memory included knowledge about migration routes, seasonal resources, and safe shelters. It included shared habits, routines, and problem-solving strategies. These cultural memories required a strong sense of collective identity and encouraged individuals to see themselves as part of a continuing story. This sense of continuity supported the development of temporal awareness and deepened the experience of being an individual living across time. Climate shifts also influenced early spiritual or symbolic ideas. When weather patterns became unpredictable or dramatic events occurred, such as floods or prolonged droughts, early humans responded emotionally and cognitively. They may not have had the concepts to explain such events, but they experienced them intensely. These experiences created strong memories and influenced the marks they made on cave walls or the rituals they developed in communities. The desire to understand or influence environmental forces encouraged symbolic behavior and strengthened the link between outer experience and inner meaning. Changes in vegetation and animal populations also affected the narratives early humans shared through gesture, drawing, and sound. As new species appeared or familiar ones disappeared, groups needed to update their collective knowledge. This constant updating reinforced the importance of shared understanding. It required groups to integrate new information into their cultural practices, which supported cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility allowed early humans to revise beliefs and strategies, which is essential for self-awareness because it requires evaluating one's own thoughts. When individuals encountered extreme conditions such as severe cold, drought, or prolonged wind, they experienced sensations the mind could not ignore. These sensations shaped emotional life and encouraged deeper internal awareness. A mind that understood discomfort could also understand comfort more deeply. A mind that encountered danger learned to appreciate safety. These contrasts shaped early emotional experience and encouraged individuals to reflect, even in simple ways, on what they felt. All these climate-driven changes, movement, scarcity, abundance, danger, opportunity, and emotional challenge, created a world that pushed the mind to adapt constantly. This ongoing adaptation strengthened neural connections, deepened memory, expanded symbolic capacity, and reinforce the need for cooperation. Early humans didn't think of themselves as conscious beings shaped by climate, but they were. The shifting Earth shaped their thoughts, their behaviours, their social dynamics, and their understanding of time. As early humans moved through landscapes shaped by shifting climate, deepening social bonds, and growing symbolic thought, something began forming quietly inside their minds. It wasn't visible from the outside, and it didn't arrive with sudden revelation. It appeared in small shifts, experienced privately, often without any outward sign. It was the growing sense of a self, not merely a body moving through the world, not just a member of a group, but an individual with perspectives, memories, feelings, and intentions unique to them. This emerging awareness didn't come all at once. It grew steadily, anchored by countless experiences that nudged the mind toward understanding its own existence. One of the earliest steps toward recognizing the self came from physical interaction with the environment. When early humans manipulated tools, shaped objects, or altered their surroundings, they experienced a direct connection between their actions and the world's response. Striking a stone created a specific sound and produced a sharp edge. Digging in the ground changed its texture and revealed roots or water. Using a stick to reach fruit demonstrated that the body's movement could extend beyond the limits of the hand. These experiences created a mental link between intention and result. The mind learned that actions originated within, and this origin point became one of the earliest anchors for recognizing individuality. Movement reinforced this connection. Early humans noticed their own footsteps in soft earth, and could compare those prints with the prints of animals or other group members. These comparisons taught them that their bodies left unique traces. When they watched their shadows shift in sunlight, the outline mirrored their movement precisely. These reflections were simple, but they helped create the understanding that something about their own presence was distinct. At first, this distinction was purely physical, but over time, it encouraged the mind to think of itself as something stable that persisted through different moments of experience. Another influence came from social life. Living in communities required constant attention to others, and this attention sharpened the ability to notice subtle differences between individuals. Someone who moved quickly had a different rhythm from someone who moved slowly. Someone who expressed discomfort reacted differently from someone who remained calm. These differences shaped social understanding. When early humans learned to recognize individual traits in others, they indirectly strengthened their ability to recognize individuality within themselves. This awareness didn't take the form of deliberate thought. Instead, it lived in the quiet patterns of daily life, in the unspoken recognition that people behaved differently because they were different. As communication developed, even in simple forms, individuals became more aware of how their actions affected others. A gesture made in frustration could cause tension. A sound of reassurance could calm a frightened child. These exchanges taught early humans that their expressions mattered. They mattered because they signaled internal states, and those states influenced group behavior. Recognizing this influence required early humans to monitor their own reactions more closely. Monitoring internal reactions was a small but meaningful step toward understanding the self from the inside. Memory played an even deeper role. As memory grew more detailed, early humans began carrying longer stretches of lived experience within their minds. They remembered past hunts, familiar paths, dangerous places, and comforting shelters. These memories didn't exist all at once. They came in fragments, resurfacing at different moments. Each resurfacing reminded the mind that it had lived before, that experiences accumulated, and that the same individual who walked through a valley today had walked through another valley seasons earlier. This sense of continuity became a core part of self-recognition. Reflections in water supported this growing awareness. When early humans bent over still pools or slow-moving streams, they occasionally saw their own image. At first, they likely treated it the same way many animals do, with curiosity, confusion, or indifference. But over time, Repeated encounters with reflections created opportunities for mental links. They noticed that the shape in the water moved when they moved. The face that looked back shifted its expression when theirs shifted. The connection wasn't immediate. It took many generations for the mind to understand that the image represented the self. But each encounter contributed a small piece to that understanding. Recognition of the self in reflection wasn't just about recognizing a face. It was about understanding that the face belonged to the same individual who felt hunger, cold, pain, comfort, and curiosity. The mind learned to integrate physical sensation with visual self-perception. A reflection became more than an image. It became a symbol of the individual who inhabited the body. This realization required layers of cognitive development, memory, pattern recognition, emotional awareness, and the understanding that internal experience existed independently of external events. Another powerful influence on self-awareness came from the emotional life. Early humans experienced fear, comfort, frustration, joy, and grief long before they understood these feelings conceptually. But as emotional expression became more visible through communication and group interaction, individuals began recognizing patterns in their own emotions. They learned that fear came from danger, comfort came from safety, and frustration came from unmet needs. Observing these patterns in themselves encouraged them to anticipate emotional reactions in different situations. Anticipation required internal awareness, because it meant understanding that feelings arose from internal states rather than external forces alone. Social reflection also shaped the sense of self. When someone acted unexpectedly, others responded. These responses created a feedback loop. If an individual showed hesitation during a hunt, group members might react with concern. If someone displayed confidence, others might follow their lead. This feedback helped early humans understand that their behavior could shape the group's actions. Recognizing this influence encouraged them to think more deeply about their own intentions. Intentional thought, even in simple forms, strengthened the experience of individuality. Group cooperation required individuals to remember who had helped them and who they had helped in the past. This social memory created a sense of connection built on past interactions. Understanding social connections required individuals to track their own behavior and the behavior of others. This tracking created a mental record of personal history inside the group. Personal history contributed significantly to self-awareness because it reinforced the idea that the individual was part of ongoing relationships shaped by past actions. One of the most significant influences on self-recognition came from imitation. Young children imitated adults, copying gestures, sounds, and movements. Through imitation, they discovered differences between their own abilities and the abilities of others. A child who struggled to use a tool the way an adult did learned that their physical and cognitive capabilities were not the same. This difference strengthened the sense of self because it created awareness of personal limitations and strengths. As symbolic thought continued to grow, early humans began forming internal images of themselves in action. They practiced movements mentally before performing them. They imagined possible outcomes of their decisions. This mental practice required a mind that understood itself as an agent capable of initiating actions. Agency is one of the building blocks of self-awareness. It connects intention to consequence and shapes the mental framework that underlies conscious decision-making. Language, even in its early forms, pushed this understanding even further. When early humans used sounds to express internal states, those sounds reflected the mind back to itself. A vocalization expressing hunger reminded the individual that hunger was a personal experience. A gesture indicating discomfort communicated an internal sensation outwardly. Each time someone expressed an internal state, the act of expression reinforced the idea that the state existed independently within the individual. Shared experiences within the group also shape self-awareness. When communities face danger together, individuals experience coordinated emotional responses. A sudden threat triggered fear in everyone. After surviving the threat, relief spread across the group. These shared emotional rhythms helped individuals understand that while everyone experienced similar states, each person's experience was their own. The ability to distinguish between what I feel and what others feel supported the development of a private inner world. Dreams contributed to this inner world in powerful ways. Dreams presented images that belonged only to the dreamer. No one else saw them. No one else felt their emotion. When individuals woke with lingering impressions from dreams, the mind learned that some experiences happened solely inside. These internal experiences didn't come from the outside world, but from within the individual. Recognizing the existence of internal experience was one of the most important steps toward understanding the self as separate from the environment. As symbolic art developed, early humans created images that came from memory or imagination. When they saw their own handprint on a cave wall, that imprint represented a connection between the physical self and an external symbol. The handprint wasn't the hand itself, it was a mark left by the individual. Seeing this mark days, months, or years later reinforced the idea that the self extended across time. The person who made the mark was the same individual who now stood before it. This recognition deepened temporal awareness and strengthened personal identity. Marking the environment in this way encouraged the mind to see itself as a stable presence that persisted beyond immediate actions. This stability was reinforced through personal belongings. Tools, ornaments, or objects shaped by an individual became extensions of the self. When early humans recognized their own tool among others, they were acknowledging a connection between internal experience and external reality. Social comparison played a role as well. Individuals noticed differences between themselves and others, differences in strength, skill, temperament, and reaction. These comparisons didn't carry the complexity of modern social comparison, but they allowed early humans to recognize that they were distinct from their peers. Recognizing difference supported the idea that personal experience was unique. The slow accumulation of these influences eventually gave rise to moments of direct self-recognition. A child leaning over a pool of water might pause and realize that the reflection moved with them, responded to their expressions, and mirrored their actions. This moment wasn't philosophical, it was practical, an understanding that the image represented themselves. Even if the recognition was simple, it carried enormous cognitive significance. It meant the mind understood that it existed as an individual. This recognition shaped how early humans understood their place in the world. Once the self became clear, even in basic terms, the mind could think about itself in relation to others. It could understand its role in the group, its memories, its responsibilities, and its actions. The experience of I am grew not from abstract thought but from countless interactions between body, environment, and community. As early humans began recognizing themselves as individuals with inner experiences, memories, and intentions, something quiet but important took shape in the long stretch of time that followed. Their awareness did not remain contained within their own lives. It travelled forward through countless generations in ways they could never have imagined. Every shift in their thinking, every new form of cooperation, every gesture shared around a fire, and every moment of reflection in still water created ripples that continued long after they were gone. These ripples formed a silent echo that reaches into the present. We carry parts of their awareness within us, not as memories we can consciously recall, but as capacities woven deep into how our minds work. The lives of early humans were filled with challenges, but they also offered moments of stillness, curiosity, and connection. These moments helped shape the foundation of the inner life we experience now. When they learned to notice the patterns of the world around them, they created the first steps toward the observational skills we use every day. When they connected vocal sounds with meaning, they laid the groundwork for the languages we speak. When they watched the minds of animals and recognized intention in their movements, they strengthened the ability to empathize, something that remains central to how we relate to others, Each aspect of their developing awareness became part of the mental architecture we now take for granted. Much of their awareness grew through the simple act of paying attention. Early humans learned to follow the movement of animals, the change of seasons, and the behaviours of their group. This attention shaped their survival, but it also strengthened the mental processes that support reflection. Today, even when our surroundings no longer demand the same level of vigilance, our minds retain the ability to notice small details and connect them in meaningful ways. This capacity is one of the oldest parts of our awareness. It is the reason we can learn new skills, understand complex systems, and navigate social interactions with nuance. The slow expansion of symbolic thinking in early humans is another echo that reaches us. When they began creating marks on cave walls, they weren't aiming to invent art. They were exploring representation, experimenting with the idea that images could stand for something else. This early symbolic thought eventually became the foundation for everything from writing to mathematics. Today, when we draw diagrams, tell stories, or interpret signs, we are using abilities that grew from those first experiments. Even if we never think about it directly, we rely on the same mental ability to understand symbols that early humans began shaping long before recorded history. Their early steps towards self-awareness also influence us in subtle but constant ways. The recognition that I am did not arrive suddenly for early humans. It grew from observation, memory, and social feedback. It deepened each time someone realized they were the same individual who had lived through different experiences. Today, we carry a refined version of this ability. Our sense of self is complex, shaped by countless layers of memory, emotion, thought, and culture. But at its core, it is built on the same cognitive processes that early humans first explored, recognizing continuity in our experience, distinguishing ourselves from others, and understanding that our thoughts originate within. Another echo from early human awareness appears in our emotional lives. Early humans learned to identify their own emotions because group living required emotional understanding. Cooperation depended on sensitivity to the feelings of others, and social stability depended on managing internal impulses. Over generations, this emotional awareness shaped their inner experience. Today, we move through emotions that are far more intricate than the earliest forms of fear, comfort, or curiosity. Yet these emotions remain anchored in the same basic processes. The ability to feel, label, and regulate emotion is one of the clearest signs of our connection to early humans. It shapes our decisions, relationships, and sense of meaning. Their communities also left a lasting imprint. Early humans learned that survival depended on cooperation, and cooperation depended on understanding the thoughts and intentions of others. They didn't have the concepts of empathy or theory of mind, but they practiced these abilities in their daily lives. This practice laid the foundation for the social structures we rely on now. Families, friendships, work relationships, and entire societies depend on mental processes that began forming in those early communities. Each time we navigate social situations, we're using skills refined through thousands of generations of human interaction. The pressure to adapt to climate changes shaped cognitive flexibility in early humans. They learned to adjust their strategies, rethink familiar routines, and respond to new challenges. This adaptability became deeply embedded in human cognition. Today, we draw on the same mental flexibility when we face new technologies, changing environments, or unexpected events. Even though our challenges differ from those of early humans, the mental ability to adapt remains the same. It echoes through our capacity to learn, reinvent, and rethink when necessary. Their early experiments with tools also shape the modern mind. Creating a tool required planning, precision, and an understanding of cause and effect. These cognitive steps strengthen neural pathways related to problem solving. Today, every time we build something, fix something, or troubleshoot a problem, we rely on the same mental processes. Even the ability to imagine how something will function before it exists is part of this echo. The creativity involved in toolmaking helps shape the problem-solving abilities we now use in fields ranging from engineering to everyday household tasks. The earliest forms of communication shaped how we share knowledge now. When early humans used sounds to refer to objects or actions, they created a system that allowed information to travel across time and space. This system made it possible for knowledge to accumulate across generations. Today, everything from scientific research to personal conversation builds on this foundation. Our ability to describe the world, express ideas, and understand others depends on cognitive structures shaped by those early experiments with sound. Even when we speak casually or tell stories, we are engaging with a form of communication that began thousands of years before we were born. Early humans also developed the ability to imagine scenarios beyond their immediate reality. This imagination helped them plan hunts, anticipate environmental changes, and prepare for dangers. It helped them innovate, experiment, and explore. Today, imagination plays a central role in our lives. It shapes creativity, problem-solving, storytelling, and even our ability to understand the perspectives of others. The mental leap from immediate experience to imagined possibilities is one of the oldest forms of human cognition. Its echo appears in everything from art to invention. Their early symbolic art also shaped the modern human appreciation for representation. When they made marks on cave walls, they created a visual language that allowed them to externalize their thoughts. Today we use visuals for everything from communication to entertainment. We draw, design, photograph, and map. These activities rely on the ancient link between internal imagery and external representation. The desire to understand and express ideas visually remains one of the strongest echoes of early human awareness. Another echo can be found in our relationship with the natural world. Early humans spent their lives immersed in landscapes that shaped their senses and cognition. They learned to pay attention to subtle changes in weather, the movement of animals, and patterns in vegetation. These sensitivities help shape how the human mind processes sensory information. Even though many people today live in environments far removed from those early landscapes, the mind still responds to nature in deep, familiar ways. We find calm in forests, fascination in water, and grounding in open spaces. These responses are cognitive traces of a world that shaped our ancestors' awareness over thousands of generations. The early experience of interpreting the behavior of animals also remains with us. When early humans watched animals move, interact, and respond to their environment, they strengthened their ability to read intention. Today, even though most of us don't depend on animal tracking for survival, we remain skilled at noticing patterns in behavior. We read body language, interpret facial expressions, and anticipate reactions. These abilities begin developing in early childhood and reflect the same mental processes that helped early humans understand the intentions of animals around them. Shared cultural practices, rooted in early human life, continue to shape consciousness today. Early humans created routines, rituals, and traditions even before they understood them as such. These practices organized group behavior, strengthened social bonds, and helped individuals feel connected to something bigger than themselves. Modern cultural traditions, from celebrations to shared values, trace their origins to these early practices. Each time we participate in group rituals or traditions, we are engaging with a form of meaning-making shaped by ancient communities. The sense of belonging that early humans developed within their groups also remains central to us now. They learned that identity was shaped not only by personal experience, but by relationships. Belonging helped provide structure to their understanding of the self. Today, we continue to define ourselves through our relationships, family, friends, communities, and broader social groups. Our identity is intertwined with a sense of connection, a legacy of the early human recognition that individuals cannot exist in isolation. Even the pressure to understand the future, something early humans experienced through climate shifts and environmental uncertainty, remains a powerful force. Their need to anticipate change shaped long-term thinking and planning. Today we carry that same cognitive drive. We imagine possibilities, weigh outcomes, and prepare for situations that haven't yet occurred. This ability is one of the most direct echoes of early human awareness, shaping everything from personal goals to scientific research. One of the most profound echoes lies in the simple fact that early humans learned to reflect on their experiences even before reflection took a deliberate form. Their growing awareness of internal states, memories, and personal identity created the foundation for introspection. Today, our ability to reflect is far more complex, shaped by language and culture, but it rests on the same basic cognitive processes. When we pause to think about who we are, how we feel, or why we behave in certain ways, we are participating in a form of awareness that began long before modern civilization. These echoes weave through our daily lives in ways that often go unnoticed. Without early humans realizing it, every step they took toward deeper awareness shaped the structure of the human mind. They didn't anticipate that future humans would think in complex sentences, ponder abstract ideas, or create layered narratives. But their small shifts, each one building on the last, made these capabilities possible. As we look at the awareness we carry now, we can trace its origins to the simple acts of noticing, remembering, communicating, imagining, and connecting. These acts didn't need labels. They didn't need theories. They grew naturally from the lives early humans lived, shaped by the world around them and by the groups they relied on.